What's up, everybody? This is Pastor Kevin Swann of Ivy Baptist Church in Newport News, Virginia. And if you are a member of Ivy or not, it really does not matter. We are so happy to have you join us for this low-key spiritual practices series. I hope if you have joined us so far, it's been a blessing to you. This is part 3 of a 4-part series. And so we're very excited to bring this low-key spiritual practices series to you. We're doing it because, number one, we need to define what spiritual practices are. And then number two, we need to know how to actually apply these spiritual practices. So really the goal of this study is not for you to know it. It is by the end of this video that you will actually start using it in order to grow in your relationship with God. Now, oftentimes in church, we hear a lot of different sayings on spiritual practices, but usually the same ones tend to be emphasized, whether it's prayer or Bible reading or worship or praise, fasting. All of those are very, very important, but those are not nearly the number of spiritual practices that are included in the Bible for us to consider. And if we look at the ones that are not always mentioned, that will also add value to the ones that we already know. So the two that we've covered so far, the first one was simplicity, and the second one was gratitude. Please check out those videos to see that study in its entirety. And so today we're going to go to the third spiritual practice in this series. And I want to remind you that in order to develop spiritual practices, it takes training, it takes consistency. When Paul wrote to Timothy, he said in 1 Timothy 4:7, he said, "Have nothing to do with godless myths and old wives' tales, but rather train yourself to be godly." That's on us to do. We have to work at these practices. They will not come to us easily. The Lord is not just going to drop them out of the sky and allow us to do them. These are things that we have to incorporate into our walk with God every single day. We have to develop the habits of practicing these things every single day in order for us to be better in our relationship with God. So today's practice that we're going to focus on, again, is one that we don't talk about a lot, but is very important. And that is the low-key spiritual practice of solitude. Solitude. Now, whenever you want to know something, the first place you need to go, obviously, is to the dictionary. And solitude in the dictionary is the state or situation of being alone. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are lonely in terms of solitude, but it does mean you are alone. And the real purpose of solitude, spiritually speaking, is to get and leave everything and everyone in order for us to have some time with God. We're leaving everything behind. We're leaving everyone behind so that we can just sit in the presence of our God in uninterrupted fashion. And this is what is important. Solitude has to be free from distractions. So if you're in a room, for example, and you got the TV on, that's not really solitude. If you're in a room by yourself and maybe you got music going, that's not really solitude. Solitude is eliminating everything and you are just focusing in on you and God. And solitude is demonstrated by isolating us from the world. It's from everything. And so that we can settle our minds and we can just focus in on God and what God is trying to say to us, what God is really trying to do for us. And I guarantee you that if you use the practice of solitude, it's going to help you tremendously in other disciplines. Your prayer life is going to be a whole lot better when you learn first the value of solitude. Your worship is going to get a lot better because you're going to learn first the value of solitude. And if we're children of God, as we'll see later in this study, Jesus practiced solitude quite a bit. And so for us, that means we got to understand that there are a lot of noises. There are a lot of distractions. There are a lot of things that enter into our mind and into our space that really prevent us from just sitting and being still and just focusing on the Lord with no interruptions. Jesus talked about this when it comes to our prayer life in Matthew chapter 6. When Jesus is talking about prayer, This is what Jesus said in Matthew 6, verses 5 and 6. Jesus said, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you openly." That's the key to prayer, Jesus is saying. Don't be necessarily praying in front of others. Now, to be clear, there is time and value for corporate prayer. We do corporate prayer at our church every Sunday. So there is value in coming together and praying with and for others. But what Jesus says here in Matthew chapter 6 is that in order to get the real benefit of prayer, there are times where you don't need to necessarily be standing in front of others, because sometimes when people are praying in front of others, their prayer tends to take on a different form. We're more concentrated now on sometimes how people will respond to the prayer as opposed to actually just praying to God. No, Jesus said here in Matthew 6, we are to go in our room and we are to close the door and we are to leave everything behind. And Jesus says here that what you pray for in secret, that God will begin to reward you openly. So then that means that what is manifested in the public space, what other people are seeing in our life, is a direct result of what we are doing in private. So if we have not mastered the practice of solitude and learning to go to God in private, then what will people see in public? The answer is not very much. Or they might see a form of godliness that really isn't deep at all. It's really shallow. If you really want the presence of God to be manifested in your public spaces, it first starts with what you're doing privately. So I'm going to ask you, what are you doing privately, away from the noise, away from your family, away from your job, away from the TV, away from the music, away from anything that you have to have in order to function? God said, no, I want you to get away from all of that. Because how can you really hear my voice if you have so many other distractions that are going on in your life? So solitude is extremely important because it adds to our prayer life. When we go into a room and we close the door and we leave everything and everyone behind. So with that, and we know now and we see the value of solitude, maybe one of the things that we need to talk about now is what makes solitude difficult. What makes it difficult? And why is it such a low-key but powerful spiritual practice? Well, there's several reasons that makes solitude different. Number one, let's just be honest. A lot of people just can't sit still. A lot of people are just, they feel that it's uncomfortable when you're in a quiet moment. It just doesn't feel right? Like you feel like you got to be doing something, or you got to be going something, or going somewhere, or just the thought of sitting still quietly is very unnerving for a lot of people. You know, I hear people say all the time, you know, Pastor, even when I go to sleep, I got to have the TV on, or, you know, I got to have some music on, or I have to have something on. So the thought of just sitting quietly with no interruption, with no rush to go anywhere, is difficult for a lot of people. Because immediately our minds start racing. We start thinking about the next thing. I got to figure out where I'm going to go next. I got to figure out this bill I'm going to pay. I got to figure out these kids that's getting on my nerves. I got to figure out my spouse that's driving me crazy as well. All these things start flooding our minds and we find it difficult. And let me also add to this. Another reason why solitude is difficult, especially in grieving situations, because a lot of people wrestle with the fact that after a loved one has transitioned, it's hard to just sit with that. So what do? We run ourselves into the ground. We tell ourselves we have to be busy. We find the next thing to do because we would rather keep staying in motion than to sit with the fact that we have to actually process the grief that we are experiencing. And that takes solitude. That takes practice. And that takes work. So what you have is you have a lot of people who have had loved ones to transition years ago, but they never really processed it because they still find themselves moving and going and doing on to the next. Well, my friend, in order for you to really process that, there has to come a time where you're going to have to just sit with it, or else you're going to wear yourself out. So number one, what makes solitude difficult is that it's hard for us to just sit still. We're used to being people in motion, and we think that there's something wrong if we're not moving or doing something. Number two, it's uncomfortable for a lot of people. There's a lot of people just uncomfortable sitting in silence. It's just not something that we are accustomed to. We prefer noise. We like noise. We're used to noise. Let me just pause for 5 seconds. Some of you already was like, Pastor, can you please start talking again, please? Because, listen, that's just making me uncomfortable. I need you to say something. Why? Why do I? And why do you? We have to learn how to embrace the silent gaps in spaces. And that's something that we have to practice. Something that is not easy to us or comfortable for us. We have to work at it. And then number three, more importantly, a lot of people don't actually know what to do when you're in solitude. So if I don't have a TV on, or if I don't have my phone with me, if I'm not on social media, if I'm not listening to music, then what am I doing? Just sitting somewhere, just looking around. Like, how am I supposed to function when there's nothing going on? And that's a clear indication you are dependent upon other stimuli to keep you going. And this is the practice of learning that as I sit still, I can really now tune in to God. What is God trying to say to you, family? What is God trying to do in your life that maybe it's been hard for you to hear because you haven't been in solitude? How do you know that what God is doing right now in your life is actually His will? How do you know it's His will versus yours? Have you actually had time to sit down with God to hear from God, not just to talk to God, but to hear from Him? That's what we do in those times where we are alone. Now, let's take solitude and let's not just make it a spiritual thing, but let's look at solitude from a relationship perspective. So I want you to think about your loved one. Think about somebody that you're in a relationship with. And if you're not in a relationship right now, think of the type of relationship you would want to be in with somebody that you love. Well, solitude is the time that you spend just with that person. You can't have a relationship, a marriage, or a significant relationship where you're always around other people. When is there time for you and your loved one to work on your relationship? When is it time for you and your loved one to talk or to share? You can't always do that with other people around. My wife and I, we, bless the Lord, this year we'll be approaching 27 years of marriage. And one of the things that I have now discovered with my wife is that what she really values more than anything else is just quality time. It's just the time spent uninterrupted with her and me. It's not about always the gifts. Those are nice. It's the words of affirmation. We know that, but sometimes it's just the quality time of her and I is what she values the most. And that's exactly what solitude is. That's exactly what God wants. just us and him alone spending time together. Also, I want you to think of it like this. Relationship in private is what builds intimacy. And I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about connection, right? It's the connection that you have with your loved one that leads to a deeper understanding of who they are and also who you are, what they like and what you like, what you need and what they need. That's really what intimacy is. Intimacy is basically when you know that your loved one gets you. They understand you. They know you. And how does that happen? That doesn't happen in public spaces where they get you. That doesn't happen on social media. It happens through exchanges that take place in private. It's exactly what solitude is. It's the time for us to better understand God and for God to better show us what his plan is for our lives. It's just like a relationship with a loved one. We don't build great relationships publicly. And any relationship that's trying to show you in public that everything is fine, you better check that one. Because real relationships are built and developed in private. And so I'm certain that your loved one and even you, what you value in your relationship is time. Can you block out some time for me? I know your schedule is busy. You're working one job, maybe two. You got all kinds of stuff going on. We got kids. We got other activities that we are a part of. But when I talk to a lot of couples, aside from money, one of the great challenges that a lot of couples have when I sit with them in either premarital counseling or postmarital counseling is time. Where is the time for me, for us? Not just time with the kids, just one-on-one time. Where is that time that we can have so that we can connect? If you understand that in a physical relationship, what you're actually saying is what you want is solitude, because that's what solitude is. You're asking God, or you're making room for God in the same way you're making room for your loved one to go on a trip for the weekend, to have a nice dinner, to go and just sit and have a date night at home. You're not even going anywhere. It's just the effort of blocking out everybody and everyone for just me and you. If that's something that you value in a physical relationship with your loved one, then please understand this is also something that God desires from you. He would like nothing better than for you to block out time to just spend with him. God would like nothing better than for you to get into that closet and not be rushed, but just sit there and just spend time. And part of the challenge is that we don't value this because we're constantly on the go. So oftentimes we give God on the go prayers or on the go worship as we're doing something else, as we're headed to something else. But I guarantee you, if you're in a relationship with a loved one, you wouldn't just want them to talk to you as they're walking out the door. You wouldn't want them to just talk to you while they're in the car going to work. You would want them also to say, look, on the weekend, we need to at least block out some time. And God is saying the exact same thing. Now, what I need you to understand is that solitude is extremely important. Why? Because Jesus practiced solitude. I want to share for you a verse in Mark chapter 1. It's important. In Mark 1, verses 35 to 37. It says there that very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him. And when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Now notice the text. Jesus could have prayed in the house with everybody else. They were already asleep. It says very early in the morning. He probably was up by himself. But what Jesus decided was, not only do I want to get up and pray, but I want to leave everyone behind. Jesus got up early in the morning. He left the house. The Bible says he goes to a solitary place, just him and God. And there he prayed. And in the morning, when Simon Peter woke up, they were panicked. Where's Jesus? They went to looking for him. And when they found him, they said, look, man, everybody is looking for you. What's going on? Now that helps us to understand if Jesus valued solitary time that much, where he could have prayed right there in the house. Everybody else was asleep. If he valued solitary time that much, where he got up so early in the morning to leave the house to find a space. And notice, he stayed there. They had to come find him. He didn't go back to the house. If Jesus values this kind of solitary moments with our God, shouldn't we also? And there may be times, family, we're going to have to leave the house, leave some people, leave some friends, leave our loved ones to just hear and appreciate the presence of God. Now, these don't have to be lengthy times. You can start developing the practice of solitude with small increments of time and build your way up. On a lunch break, you don't have to go off with your coworkers on a lunch break. You can find you a space, maybe in your car during lunch break. No radio on. It's just you in the car. Word out, and just taking some time to talk to God and allow God to talk to you. That will elevate your prayer life. So as we finish today, I want you to understand the importance of solitude. And again, I want to emphasize this is not an option for us as believers. This is actually something that we need to practice on a consistent basis. You have 24 hours in every day, 168 hours in a week. How much time in your week do you devote to uninterrupted time with God? How much time do you just spend sitting still, listening, waiting patiently, connecting with God? This is not a wish that the Lord is demonstrating. This is a must for us. We must find time. And this is what I know to be true. Whatever is most important to us in life, if it's really important, no matter what it is, we'll find a way to do it. Whatever it is that we want to spend money on, if it's that important to us, we'll find a way to spend it. We won't pay a bill and spend money on something if we think it's that important. So I'm asking you today, how important is solitude to you now? I hope that you put it up higher on your list. And while you got all the errands and while you're thinking about all the things you have to do, add to that list, I need to leave the house. I need to find a space, and I need to sit with our God. Number 2, please know that solitude makes everything else better. Jesus said, if you do it in private, I will reward you openly. So as you get stronger in private in your prayer time, stronger in private in your worship, stronger in private in your Bible study, it will become noticeable to everybody else in public because God sees and is with you in your private spaces. This is so rich. And then finally, I want to leave with always a question that I want you to ponder. Who or what is distracting you? Who or what is preventing you from having that uninterrupted time with God? Is it the kids that's always coming around? Is it not feeling like you have any time for yourself? Is it the demands of the job? Is it your loved one? Or is it you? We spend a lot of time mindlessly scrolling through social media. We spend a lot of time mindlessly playing all these games on our phones. If we took a portion of that time to just say, I'm going to stop that for now and just be still and appreciate the presence of God, that will go a long way. So family, I hope you've enjoyed this study today. Again, this is part three of a 4-part series. Today, we did solitude. So let's review. We've done simplicity, we've done gratitude, and now we've done solitude. We got one more to go. Invite your family and friends to check this out. And thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, be blessed and be a blessing to someone else. Love you in Jesus' name. Have a great day.